A man's watch is one of the few things he wears every day, often without thinking about it, and that's why it matters. In film, watches are rarely chosen at random. Sometimes they are status symbols, sometimes they are tools, and oftentimes they tell you a lot about the character of the man before he's even said a word. In this video, I want to take a look at a handful of iconic movie watches, not just as objects of style, but as extensions of the wearer's character. Because a good watch isn't just there to be seen, it's there to tell a story. And that applies whether you're a Hollywood star or not. Let's start with a timepiece that most people remember incorrectly, which is Patrick Bateman's watch, worn by Christian Bale in American Psycho. If you ask somebody what watch Patrick Bateman wears in American Psycho, they'd almost certainly say Rolex. On paper, that makes perfect sense. Bateman is obsessed with outward signs of success, with status symbols, with brands, and he's a 27-year-old vice president working on Wall Street. Of course he wears a Rolex, but actually he wears a Seiko. Now it's quite easy to miss because it has the proportions, the aesthetic, the steel bracelet, the general look of a Rolex Datejust. And unless you really knew what you were looking for, you'd never really question it, which in a strange way actually makes it perfect for this character. Now in the novel by Bret Easton Ellis, Bateman explicitly wears a Rolex. It's actually mentioned in the book 26 times. I think the author did this deliberately to show that it wasn't just a watch for Bateman, it was a real psychological crutch, a crucial part of his self-worth. Now, when the film was made, Rolex didn't want to be associated with Patrick Bateman, so the production team quietly swapped out the watch for a very similar looking Seiko. But I think the fact that they replaced it with a much cheaper look-alike watch is actually more revealing about the character, because everything about Patrick Bateman is surface level. It's a performance, it's fake, it's empty. And that's not to say that the Seiko isn't a good watch, but of course, it doesn't have the same material value or the kind of prestige that a Rolex does. So although it's convincing on the surface level, the narrative falls apart when you look a little bit closer, which is exactly the same for Bateman's character. The next watch is Elvis Presley's Hamilton Ventura in Blue Hawaii. Now, by the time Blue Hawaii was released in the 1960s, Hamilton was already deeply embedded in American life. This was still an era when buying American wasn't a political statement, it was just the norm. Swiss watches hadn't yet taken over the imagination, as they later would, so a Hamilton watch represented something very specific. It was optimistic, it was modern, and it represented a kind of quiet confidence that Americans had at that time. Now, the Ventura model that Elvis wears fits perfectly into the era of the late 50s and early 60s. Its design follows what's known as the Googie style, and you saw this in architecture, the same futuristic curves and shapes that you saw all over the 1950s with their cars, with their diners, motels, architecture. Everything was looking forward, everything felt possible. And this was also the world's first watch to be powered electronically by a battery. Now, what's nice about the Ventura watch is it doesn't feel overly styled or overly deliberate. It feels like something Elvis would genuinely wear at that time. It was casual, it was modern for the era, and definitely a little playful. It wasn't overly traditional. Before watches became gadgets, before heritage marketing, before a watch had to tell a story, this was the exact type of thing that an optimistic young American man would have worn. Now, Steve McQueen's Tag Heuer Monaco, worn in Le Mans, doesn't feel like a prop. It feels like an intrinsic part of the story. The square case was a strange choice at the time, especially in motorsport. This was a place where wristwatches were round, they were traditional, they were conservative and functional. But that wasn't what Steve McQueen was all about. He wanted realism, and he famously modeled his racing suit on the suit worn by Joe Stifford, and the Tag Monaco came along with it. There's no sense that anyone sat down with Tag and decided that this would be a good branding opportunity. And that's exactly why it works and why people love this watch so much. The watch looks a little awkward. It's very uncompromising, it's very purposeful, and I think that's why it suits McQueen so well. It looks like something you wear when you care about doing the job properly, more than looking perfect while doing it. Although Steve McQueen obviously did quite a good job of doing both. Now, by the way, if you are enjoying this video and everything that we talk about here at Gentleman's Collective, I want to remind you that applications are currently open for our private members club. And you can find the link to apply for that down in the description. If there is a watch on this list that genuinely deserves its reputation, it's Tom Hanks's Omega Speedmaster, worn in Apollo 13. Now, this wasn't a costume decision made for show or a watch meant to convey a symbolic message. It's actually the same watch worn by real astronauts, issued by NASA. And this is a watch that is trusted in situations where timing genuinely matters. In the film, it's used exactly as it would be in real life, to time an engine burn that ultimately helps bring the crew home. In the movie, there's no lingering shot on the dial, no emphasis on the watch, no attempt to draw attention to it, but perhaps it's this that has made it so iconic. The restraint made the watch and its connection to the movie all the more powerful and authentic. The Speedmaster here isn't about style or identity, and it's a reminder that, at their best, watches are actually a tool designed to serve something greater than ourselves. Sean Connery's Submariner is probably the most iconic movie watch of all time, not because it was flashy or anything new, but because he wears it everywhere. He wears it underwater, he wears it with short sleeves, and famously he even wore it with his dinner jacket. Now, by traditional British standards, that shouldn't work. A dive watch certainly didn't belong with black tie in the 1960s. But Bond was never interested in following rules for the sake of them. His confidence came from an unusual combination of competence and rebelliousness. Connery made the Submariner feel natural in situations where it didn't belong, and men have been copying him ever since. Today, nobody thinks twice about wearing a dive watch with formal clothes, and that shift in attitude can be traced back to those 60s movies. What's also interesting about James Bond's Rolex is how little fuss there was around it at the time. Connery essentially wore the same watch across multiple films. There was no grand marketing campaign, very little product placement, no new launches to coincide with the movies. It was all very natural and low-key. Now, you compare this to the modern Bond movies where every movie release coincides with a global marketing campaign and even new timepieces. Compared to that, Sean Connery and his Rolex sub feel very authentic and genuine. And that's probably why, no matter how long the Omega Bond partnership goes on for, most people will always still associate 007 with a Rolex on his wrist. Next, we're going to talk about Harrison Ford's Hamilton Bolton in the Indiana Jones series. Indiana Jones isn't a man who spends time thinking about accessories. He's an academic, an explorer, someone who's usually too busy surviving to care about what's on his wrist. Which is exactly why the Hamilton feels so right. It's simple, legible, and durable. An everyman's kind of watch that exists to do its job without complaint. There are no attempts to impress here, and Indy certainly can't be too precious about what's on his wrist. This feels like something that he picked up years ago, put on his wrist, and never thought about again. And in a world where cinema is all about excess and product placement, Indiana Jones and his humble Hamilton feel just right. Whereas American cinema is often about action, confidence, bravado, machismo, 1967's LeSamourai is about control, discipline, and stillness. And the Baume et Mercier worn by French star Alain Delon reflects those character traits perfectly. It's slim, restrained, and completely unshowy. Much like Delon's character, it doesn't seek attention, and it doesn't need to in order to be stylish. He even wore the watch on the inside of his wrist. However, Delon's character, Jeff Costello, is defined by routines, by precision, and his watch becomes a part of these rituals. I think this emphasizes his very disciplined nature. The watch isn't just a timepiece, it's actually a storytelling device. It adds depth to his character, that stoic exterior, much like that big ring of keys that he carries. Baume et Mercier is not as well remembered today, but compared to many of their Swiss contemporaries, their pricing is very, very reasonable for the quality of timepiece. So if you've been interested in a Jaeger-LeCoultre or a Vacherin Constantin, maybe check out Baume & Mercier before parting with your money. Gentlemen, if you enjoyed this, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these iconic timepieces was your favorite? Or do you perhaps think that there is an iconic movie watch that deserved to be on this list? And if you'd like more of this, film, style, and reflections, you can sign up for the Gentleman's Digest. That's our short weekly newsletter, and you'll find the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.